Her name was Olivia, and she had learned early in life that love meant sacrifice. At 21 years old, she was homeless, living in her car in San Antonio, Texas, working double shifts at whatever jobs would hire someone without a permanent address. Her life had been consumed by caregiving since she was old enough to understand that her mother needed help. Her father had left when she was 3, leaving her mother to raise her alone on a nurse's salary. Her mother had worked impossibly long hours, 12, 14, 16-hour shifts, trying to provide for them both while maintaining some semblance of a stable home. For years, it had been just the two of them against the world. Olivia remembered the sound of her mother's car pulling into the driveway late at night, remembered helping her mother soak her aching feet in warm water, remembered listening to her mother talk about the patients she had helped that day. Her mother was the kind of person who loved fiercely, who gave everything she had to everyone around her, who never complained even when she was exhausted beyond measure. Olivia had wanted to be like her mother, generous, compassionate, strong. Then, 3 years ago, when Olivia was 18, her mother had started getting sick. At first, it was just fatigue that seemed worse than usual. Then there were headaches. Then there was the day her mother collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was a brain tumor. The kind that couldn't be operated on safely. The kind that would slowly steal her mother away from her, piece by piece, memory by memory. Olivia had dropped out of college. She had become her mother's primary caregiver, working part-time while managing her mother's medical appointments, medications, and the increasingly complex needs of someone slowly losing control of their body. She had held her mother's hand through chemotherapy. She had cleaned up after accidents she knew humiliated her mother. She had whispered reassurances even when she wasn't sure she believed them herself. She had loved her mother the same way her mother had always loved her, completely, without reservation, without expectation of anything in return. But loving someone who was dying was destroying her from the inside. The stress, the exhaustion, the constant fear that she was doing something wrong or missing something crucial, it all accumulated like poison in her veins. When her mother finally died, 6 months ago, Olivia had felt a terrible combination of relief and devastation that made her question whether she was a good person. How could she be relieved that her mother's suffering had ended? How could she feel guilty for surviving? The apartment she and her mother had rented together was gone within weeks. Olivia couldn't afford the rent on her part-time job. Her mother's medical bills had consumed any savings they had. She had ended up in her car, a 2010 Honda Civic that had been her mother's before the illness made driving impossible. Sometimes Olivia would sit in that car and cry because it still smelled like her mother, like the lavender perfume she had always worn, like the cinnamon gum she had chewed nervously. For the past 6 months, Olivia had been living in that car, working whatever job she could find, going through the motions of survival without any real sense of purpose. She woke up. She worked. She slept in her car. She woke up again. It was a cycle that felt endless and pointless. She kept thinking about her mother, about how her mother had loved life even when it was hard, even when it was unfair. And she wondered why she was bothering to continue when everything inside her felt hollow and broken. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while scrolling through her phone in a McDonald's parking lot where she had parked to use their free Wi-Fi, she saw the listing. An abandoned zoo in San Antonio was being auctioned off by the county for $5. The zoo had been closed for 15 years, sitting empty and decaying on the edge of the city. The listing included photographs of overgrown pathways, empty animal enclosures slowly being reclaimed by nature, and what looked like a collection of statues and sculptures scattered throughout the grounds. Olivia stared at the listing for a long time. She had $5 in her pocket. It was money she had been saving for gas, but something about the zoo called to her in a way she couldn't explain. Her mother had taken her to a zoo once when she was 8 years old. They couldn't afford admission, so they had snuck in through a back entrance. Olivia remembered the wonder in her mother's eyes as they looked at the animals. She remembered her mother squeezing her hand and whispering that all creatures deserved to be appreciated, that beauty could be found everywhere if you looked hard enough. It was a moment of desperation or insanity, or maybe it was something else, her mother's voice whispering from somewhere beyond death, telling her to take a chance, to believe in something. Olivia went to the county auction with her $5. She sat in a folding chair in a government office that smelled like old carpet and despair, and she bought an abandoned zoo. When the official handed her the deed, her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the paper. The zoo was located on the outskirts of San Antonio, on land that had been left to decay and be reclaimed by the Texas landscape. When Olivia drove there 2 weeks after the auction, she almost turned around. The entrance gate was rusted shut. The sign that had once announced the zoo's name was now barely legible. Everything about the place screamed abandonment and loss, but when she managed to pry open the gate and step inside, something shifted. The pathways were overgrown with wildflowers and native plants. The animal enclosures, while empty and sad, were being slowly softened by moss and vines. And scattered throughout the grounds, she found the statues, dozens of them. Vintage animal sculptures in various states of decay and preservation. Concrete lions with faded paint. Stone elephants that had weathered decades of Texas sun and rain. Wooden giraffes that were slowly returning to nature. Marble deer that still maintained some of their original grace despite the cracks and weathering. Olivia walked slowly through the zoo, touching each statue, imagining the hands that had created them, the vision of whoever had wanted to create this place. She found a small building that had once been the gift shop. Inside, she discovered more sculptures, some still boxed and wrapped, never sold. Some with artist signatures and dates going back to the 1950s. She found ledgers documenting the zoo's history, showing which sculptures had been commissioned and when. She found photographs of the zoo in its heyday, crowded with families, with children pointing at the statues and the live animals, with people laughing and creating memories, and for the first time in 6 months, Olivia felt something other than pain. She felt purpose beginning to stir in her chest. She felt her mother's presence in this place, felt like maybe her mother was telling her that even abandoned things could be restored, that even broken things could be beautiful again, that love could survive loss if you were willing to work for it. Over the following weeks, Olivia spent every moment she wasn't working documenting the sculptures and statues scattered throughout the zoo grounds. She photographed each piece carefully, noting its condition, its artist's signature if visible, and any identifying markers. She researched the zoo's history through old newspapers and city records. She discovered that the zoo had been built in the 1950s by a man named Thomas Whitmore, a visionary artist and conservationist who had believed that zoos should be places of beauty and art as well as animal exhibition. Whitmore had commissioned sculptures from local and regional artists throughout the 1950s and 60s, creating an outdoor gallery that celebrated both animals and art. The sculptures told stories. There was a series of big cats, lions, tigers, leopards, created by an artist named Margaret Chen in 1958. There were African animals, elephants, giraffes, zebras, sculpted by an artist named Robert Santos in the 1960s. There were domestic animals and fantastical creatures created by dozens of different artists whose names were now mostly forgotten. Each piece represented hours of work, artistic vision, and love for the craft. Olivia contacted sculpture experts, art historians, and conservators. She sent them photographs and information about the collection. What they told her was extraordinary. The statues were valuable, not just monetarily, though several pieces were worth substantial sums individually, but historically and artistically. This was a documentation of mid-century American sculpture and artistic vision. Several of the artists represented in the collection were now recognized as important figures in American art history. Their work here, in this abandoned zoo in San Antonio, was a hidden treasure that had been slowly disappearing from public knowledge. Experts offered her money for individual pieces. Collectors wanted to purchase the entire collection. She could have sold everything and lived comfortably for years. She could have paid off her mother's remaining medical debt. She could have given herself the stability she had never had. Surrounded by the statues her mother had never seen, surrounded by the vision of a man long dead who had wanted to create a place of beauty, she knew she couldn't sell. These sculptures belonged here. They belonged in this space that Thomas Whitmore had imagined. They belonged to the community that had forgotten them. Instead, Olivia made a radical decision. She decided to restore the zoo as an outdoor sculpture garden and wildlife sanctuary. She would create a space where art and nature could coexist, where the sculptures could be preserved and appreciated, where live animals could be cared for ethically and compassionately. She would honor Thomas Whitmore's original vision while creating something new and meaningful. The restoration work began with a crowdfunding campaign. Olivia told her story, the homeless young woman who had bought an abandoned zoo for $5, who had discovered a hidden collection of sculptures, who wanted to bring the space back to life. The campaign went viral. People donated. Artists volunteered their time. Community members organized work parties to clear overgrown pathways and repair broken structures. Olivia found herself surrounded by people who believed in her vision, who wanted to help restore this forgotten place. The physical labor of restoration became her therapy. Every day, Olivia worked to clean and preserve sculptures. She learned restoration techniques from experts. She carefully cleaned decades of weathering and neglect from each piece. She researched the original artists and tried to restore the sculptures as close to their original appearance as possible. As she worked, she felt her mother's presence guiding her hands, encouraging her, telling her that this work mattered. One afternoon, while carefully cleaning a marble deer created by Margaret Chen in 1958, Olivia found something unexpected. Carved into the base of the sculpture, almost hidden by weathering and moss, were words, "For beauty to survive, we must protect it. For hope to exist, we must create it." MC, 1958. Olivia sat down on the dusty ground and cried, because that was exactly what she was doing. She was protecting beauty. She was creating hope. And somehow, across 70 years, an artist she had never met was speaking directly to her, validating her choices, confirming that what she was doing mattered. As the months progressed, the zoo transformed. The pathways became beautiful walking trails through an outdoor sculpture garden. The animal enclosures were carefully renovated to accommodate rescued animals, birds with injured wings, reptiles that couldn't survive in the wild, mammals that had been surrendered by people who could no longer care for them. Olivia worked with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to create ethical sanctuaries for these animals. She created educational displays about each sculpture, about the artists who had created them, about the history of the zoo. The grand reopening happened 2 years after Olivia had purchased the zoo. Hundreds of people came. They came to walk through the sculpture garden. They came to see the rescued animals. They came to celebrate Olivia's vision of restoration and renewal. Local artists displayed their work. There were performances and speeches. And there was a moment when Olivia stood in the center of the zoo, surrounded by the sculptures her mother had never seen, and felt her mother's presence so powerfully that she had to sit down on a bench and cry. After the reopening, Olivia enrolled in college. She studied art history and sculpture conservation, wanting to deepen her knowledge and expertise. She worked at the zoo part-time, continuing to manage the sanctuary and sculpture garden. She became an expert in mid-century American sculpture and spent her evenings researching the artists whose work was preserved in the zoo. She tracked down descendants of Margaret Chen and Robert Santos and other artists, sharing photographs and stories with families who had never known their relatives' work had been preserved, but the most unexpected outcome of her decision to restore the zoo was the healing it brought to her. As Olivia worked to restore the sculptures and care for the animals and create this space of beauty, she found herself slowly coming back to life. The hollow feeling that had consumed her since her mother's death began to soften. She began to understand that her mother's death wasn't a punishment or a failure on her part. It was simply the reality of loss, something that happened to everyone, something that had to be grieved and integrated and eventually transformed into something meaningful. Her mother hadn't been wasted. Every hour she had spent caregiving, every moment she had been present for her mother's suffering, every time she had chosen her mother's needs over her own, all of that had been an expression of love that had mattered. It had mattered to her mother. And now, through the work of restoring the zoo, it was mattering to dozens of other people who found healing and beauty and hope in this space. Today, Olivia is 26 years old. She directs the Thomas Whitmore Memorial Zoo and Sculpture Garden, which has become one of San Antonio's most beloved cultural institutions. She has completed her undergraduate degree in art history and is pursuing a graduate degree in sculpture conservation. She has published research on mid-century American sculpture. She has given lectures at universities across the country about art preservation and wildlife rehabilitation, but more importantly, Olivia has found a reason to live. She has found purpose in restoration, both of art and of animals and of herself. She has found community among people who believe that beauty matters, that compassion matters, that preserving what is precious matters. She has found love again, not romantic love, though that will come when it comes, but love for her work, love for the animals she cares for, love for the artists whose vision she preserves, love for the community that has embraced her vision. Olivia bought an abandoned zoo for $5 when she was homeless and broken and couldn't see a reason to continue living. What she found there wasn't just sculptures and statues. She found her mother's spirit preserved in the vision of an artist long dead. She found a way to transform her grief into purpose. She found proof that broken things could be restored to beauty, that lost things could be rediscovered, that hope could be created through work and dedication and love. Every day when Olivia walks through the sculpture garden, she thinks of her mother. She thinks of Thomas Whitmore, the man who had dreamed of creating a place of beauty. She thinks of the animals that have found sanctuary in this space. She thinks of the visitors who come and find healing in the beauty of the sculptures and the peace of being among animals. She knows that her mother would be proud. She knows that she is honoring her mother's legacy of compassion and care by creating this space where all living things can thrive. If you believe that grief can be transformed into purpose, that beauty can survive even abandonment and decay, and that creating spaces of healing and hope is a sacred act, subscribe to this channel.